Hey everybody. So I'm here to discuss this book that I'm reading. It's called The Future is Asian. The reason I found this interesting to pick it up was because, we're always hearing stuff about how China's economy is eventually going to surpass our economy here in the United States. And that's happening at a faster rate than most realize. But it's also not just China. Many nations of Asia are growing quickly, and that whole region is gonna, they're gonna own this century. So, anyways, this book, The Future is Asian, it's by Parag Khanna, and I'll give you their little description of him, to let you know who he is. He is the managing partner of Future Map, a scenario planning and strategic advisory firm. He has been a fellow at Brookings, New America, and the Lee Kuan Yew School at the National University of Singapore, as well as an advisor to the U.S. National Intelligence Council and U.S. Special Operations Forces. Khanna holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and a bachelor and master's degrees from the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. So, anyways, again, so as I've been reading, I've been writing down different excerpts that I found interesting, so I'll share them with you now. First, as he mentions, don't think of Asia as a continent, which most people do. Think of it as a region. And he says basically that Asia stretches from the Mediterranean, I don't know if you can see this, the Mediterranean and Red Seas. So that encompasses, like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and it stretches across this whole region. So it includes Russia, Kazakhstan, India, China, of course, these countries down here, Thailand and Laos, but it also includes Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and way down here, Australia, and then way down at the bottom of the globe, New Zealand. So that whole region he refers to as Asia. That way you know what we're talking about here. So, like I say, it stretches from Mediterranean Red Seas across 2/3 of the Eurasian continent to the Pacific Ocean. It encompasses 53 countries and almost 5 billion people. You've also heard probably of the Belt and Road Initiative being instituted by China. It's the largest infrastructure construction project in world history, where China is investing money in many countries, and they're trying to recreate the old Silk Road, but this is going to facilitate trade amongst all the countries in Asia. And they've even got their claws into Africa as well. Now, the Asian Economic Zone, like I just mentioned, stretches from the Arabian Peninsula and Turkey in the west to Japan and New Zealand in the east, and Russia in the north and Australia in the south. This zone now represents 50% of global GDP and 2/3 of global economic growth. So again, it's 50% of global GDP, but it's 67% of global economic growth, which means they have the largest share of economic growth, which means it's only a matter of time before they surpass us here in the West. And here's a number, $30 trillion in middle class consumption growth through the year 2030 will only encompass, 1 trillion of that 30 trillion is expected from Western economies. So again, there will be $30 trillion in middle class consumption growth through the year 2030, but only 1 trillion of that is from Western economies. Now, Asia produces and exports as well as imports and consumes more goods than any other region in the world. Asia has several of the world's largest economies, more of the world's foreign exchange, or most of the world's foreign exchange reserves, and many of the largest banks and industrial and technology companies, and the majority of the world's largest armies. Asia has 60% of the world's population. In 2018, the world's highest growth rates were in India, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Uzbekistan. The global financial crisis was not really global because Asian growth rates continued to surge while we were going through that financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. The Asian megasystem is growing together, with the result of its whole being much greater than the sum of all its parts. All of these economies are complementing each other. But basically saying history is repeating itself because Asian economies are coming together as one whole system. And this is going to make them much more powerful than just being individual pieces. Since the 1997 and 1998 Asian financial crisis, Asian countries' trade growth with each other increased at a much faster pace than the world economy as a whole. So again, Asian countries' growth, their trade growth with each other increased at a much faster pace than the world economy as a whole. When the 2007 and 2008 financial crisis occurred in Western countries, trade among Asian nations was so robust that it was insulated pretty well against falling exports to the US and Europe. At the time of the crisis, trade among Asian nations represented 29% of their overall trade. But by 2016, that percentage was 57%. So now, the majority of the trade of Asian nations is amongst themselves. So they're not as dependent as they used to be on the West. And I think the West, including here in the United States, have grown complacent and so used to things going so well that this is just gonna keep on happening, and one day we're just gonna wake up and be like, whoa. Over the last 2 decades, Asia's subregions have gained the largest share of global trade growth, while at the same time North America has lost the greatest share of trade growth. In 2000, China represented less than 10% of technology exports from Asia. In 2014, it was 44%. Now there's this acronym, it's ASEAN, and it stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. This is a regional grouping that promotes economic, political, and security cooperation among its 10 members. The 10 members are Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Since 2014, this region has gained more annual investment than China. So that kind of points out that yes, China is, the dominant country, but when you add up all of Asia, China is still one of the pieces. They're not gonna just run away with everything. They're part of the puzzle, and they know it. That's why they're doing their Belt Road initiative. The ASEAN China Free Trade Area, again, that's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations China Free Trade Area. So in other words, this is a free trade area between China and those 10 nations. This free trade area went into effect in 2000, which created the largest free trade agreement in the world when based on population. The ASEAN is China's third largest trade partner. More than 60% of the ASEAN trade is inside Asia, and over time this number will grow. 9 of the 10 busiest international flight connections in the world are between Asian cities. That's just an interesting little stat that kind of shows you where things are headed. Japan is overtaking Europe as the largest investor in the ASEAN nations. Singapore leads all investors and in India with $14 billion in foreign direct investment. Trade denominated in US dollars is 4 times greater in volume than the United States' actual share in world trade. The strong dollar makes imports more expensive than necessary, so these countries are moving away from the dollar. China's goal is to have half of its trade denominated in its currency, the renminbi, soon. China is also pursuing blockchain currencies to enable it to circumvent and evade sanctions by the U.S. Treasury Department. The 5 largest banks in the world by assets are Chinese or Japanese. China's exports represents only 20% of GDP, and that's down from 66% in 2006. Services represent more than half of GDP. So again, China's exports percent of GDP went from 66% in 2006 to under 20% now, and that shows you that they're less dependent on exporting to us here in the West. They've got the rest of Asia nations to export to. All of the top 10 foreign holders of US dollar reserves are Asian economies. China and Japan each have over $1 trillion each in these US foreign dollar reserves, and Hong Kong and Taiwan each have $200 billion each. Now, all of these top 10 foreign holders of US dollar reserves are collectively hold more than 55% of US treasuries. So again, the majority of treasuries are held by these countries. But Asian investors in the US, they've invested everywhere, including, which may surprise you, into the shale oil industry in Texas. The China Investment Corporation and the Korean Investment Corporation each invest more than 50% of their public equity portfolios into US equities. Now, Asian financing will be needed to to underwrite the long-term debt needed to fund the United States infrastructure renewal. Saudi Arabia's public investment fund has committed $20 billion to a Blackstone infrastructure fund. Amid tensions with China, the Chinese investment in the US fell by 90% in 2018. East Asian purchases of US treasuries, which we were just talking about, those purchases of US treasuries have plateaued, and instead of underwriting the dollar, Asians are gaining confidence in investing in their own debt in capital markets. So that's actually not good for us if Asia is going to be investing less and less into our treasuries, because we're dependent on that. Asians have realized how much US banks rely on financial engineering rather than underlying fundamentals to generate growth. Their banks are actually better, with the fundamentals as far as having capital to, how much capital they have versus the loans they give out. In the future, the savings of Asians will be invested more and more into Asian investments than Western investments. The Asian bond markets are expanding at the rate of 25% a year. So again, those are just a few pieces of information from this book, The Future's Asian, by Parag Khanna. I definitely recommend it, because this is going to affect us all here in the West. And you know what? Hey, they're working hard there in Asia to grow, and all, hey, good for them. There's one little quote on the back of this book by Jim Rogers, who's a very intelligent investor. He says, "The 21st century is the century of Asia. I suggest you read this book even if you're already aware." But again, I'll put a link to this book from Amazon if you're interested in it. But definitely, if you can, get out and buy this because it affects all of us. Thank you.